There are few games as iconic and influential as Silent Hill 2. It's one of those rare instances where a sequel becomes more popular than the original game, and continues to be more popular than future sequels, almost taking on a life of its own outside of the series it came from. When people bring up Silent Hill, nearly everyone thinks of Silent Hill 2, and there's a good reason for that. Silent Hill 2 is without a doubt the strongest installment in the franchise. It tells a harrowing story of a man searching for his supposedly dead wife in a town surrounded by a blanket of fog. During this story, he encounters all manner of quirky characters and terrifying monsters, while acknowledging repressed memories. It's a game built on mystery, dread, and atmosphere, and uses all of these elements to create an iconic horror experience. It's hard to beat such a classic, and ashamedly I was a latecomer to Silent Hill, and now that I've tried it, I want more. Silent Hill fans go feral for the second game, which is probably why so many were quick to judge the initial trailer for the remake. Not because the gameplay looked terrible or that Silent Hill itself looked too clean, it was because James looked a bit clapped. The second trailer got even more backlash, with some people saying it looked like a cheap Resident Evil knockoff, what with the third person view and emphasis on combat. This made it seem like the Silent Hill 2 remake was going to be another one of those games that comes and goes, leaving both casuals and diehard fans disappointed, crawling up into a ball and playing the original version to get that horrible taste of crushed dreams out of their mouths. But that thankfully wasn't the case. The Silent Hill 2 remake for me is without question one of the best games released this year. It's difficult to put into words just how good it is, but I mean I'll try because I'm making a video on it. The odds of this game being as great as it is were pretty slim when you consider that Bloober Team were the ones behind it. That sounds a bit harsh, but when you take a brief look through their video game history and past controversies, it's easy to see why fans were a bit nervous. But credit where credit is due, this game slaps. Sure, most of the credit has to go to the original and to this beautiful man for crafting it, but so many things have been added and polished that make the experience even better. The Silent Hill 2 remake for me is the definitive way to play this disturbing, disgusting, yet beautiful video game, and I'll prove it to you. There's probably going to be a few spoilers mentioned here and there, so if you haven't played either version of Silent Hill 2, here's your warning, go play the bloody games. Though 2001 was a long time ago, and many things from that period haven't aged too well, Silent Hill 2 remains a visually appealing game, despite being released on a 6th generation console. The visual style of Silent Hill 2, to put it simply, is disgusting. The town itself feels like a living, breathing, diseased organism. Konami managed to bypass the limitations of the PS2 and even use them to their advantage. The fog of Silent Hill is probably the most recognisable element of the games. It defines a whole aspect of the series, that being the fog envelops the town, making navigation when outside even more difficult. Another added bonus is that it hides the horrible, disgusting monsters coming to kill James. The fog itself has its own presence in Silent Hill. It's working just as much against James as any of the other creepy crawlies lurking within it, and the remake arguably gives it an even bigger role. It's hard to compare the two fogs because they both excel at their jobs so well. Original fog helps hide the limitations of the PS2 while at the same time adding a sense of mystery to the town, and the remake fog feels a lot more invasive. Since you're so much closer to what's in front of you, the fog feels a lot more like a hindrance. Enemies are barely visible until they're right on top of you, which itself makes enemies scarier too. The actual visual style of Silent Hill 2 is unrivaled when you compare it to other horror games, not just from that time period, but even horror games that have been released in recent years. If you had to use one word to describe the art style of Silent Hill 2 and Silent Hill in general, it would be decay. Though the fog immediately creates an unsettling feeling within the town of Silent Hill, at first it seems like it was once a sweet little place that people love to visit. External lore goes as far to call it a resort town, but obviously whatever has come over this town has twisted it into something evil. It's hinted that Silent Hill is and always will be a corrupted place, and this is established to the player via the other world. Famously, this twisted version of the town acts as a vessel to psychologically attack an individual who is in Silent Hill, contorting into their deepest fears and anxieties. Couldn't just write them a mean letter or leave them a nasty voice message? James, you're a piece of shit. One aspect of this horrible place that remains pretty consistent is that it always seems to be falling apart, almost like the quaint facade of these homes and buildings is stripped away, and the true nature of these places is brought to light. The clean and pristine whites and greys become dirty reds and oranges, and it's unclear whether or not you're looking at a wall covered with rust or painted with blood. Even when looking at the game in its purest state, it still holds up so well. I can't tell if this static effect is from the game or my shitty busted up PS2. Either way, it's pretty freaky. The remake unlocks the true potential of Silent Hill 2 visually. The style of the original remains intact. Everything about the town reeks of wrong, and since you're able to explore much more of the town and its many disgusting crevices, the effect can be felt even more. The enhanced graphical leap allowed Bloober Team to nearly flawlessly bring Silent Hill to a modern audience, and make a town gamers have been familiar with for well over 20 years now feel terrifying and fresh all over again. Even on the lower graphical settings, the beauty of the game can't be ignored. Locations are visceral and chaotic, truly reflecting the deranged and fragmented mind mind of our poor boy James as he tries to escape these horrific monsters and traps that are of his own subconscious making. Even just walking through locations that are barren of monsters feels so much more frightening now than it did back in the original. While back then it was a relief to have a moment alone, the remake never lets you feel safe, as everywhere you visit just feels so haunting. Though the same colour palette from the original is used in the remake, it's much more in your face and evasive. The game feels so much gorier thanks to the maybe not blood-covered walls, and it helps set the stage for one of the darkest and most distressing games to come out in the last 10 years. Certain remakes decide to change the designs of some of their enemies, which has been a centre of controversy in certain fanbases, and Konami seemed to know this wouldn't go over well with Silent Hill fans. I mean, they went mad about James having too many wrinkles in his face, so imagine the shitstorm if any of the monsters were heavily redesigned. We know you guys love Pyramid Head, so now for the remake, get ready for Conehead Bloke. It just wouldn't work. Besides, all the enemies from Silent Hill 2 are perfect, except the bugs. They're probably the most pointless enemies in any game ever. The monsters created by James's dishevelled pea-brain are some of the most iconic creatures to grace the video game industry. Their crooked makeshift appearances perfectly capture the torturous nature of Silent Hill and James's inner demons. They have an otherworldly appearance to them, almost like they're trying to appear human but just never really getting there. As well as this demented side to the monsters, there's also the sexual aspect to them, symbolising James's horniness. I'm sure fans of the original game are thankful that the remake enhanced these already great designs. Much like the town itself, the monsters James fight look dirtier and wetter, like they're all greased up and ready to give James a damn good seeing to. Silent Hill 2 isn't just marvelled for its looks, it's got some bloody good sound design too. For me, this is one of the most effective pieces of sound design in the whole game. This sounds like an overreaction, but to me, the main menu captures the essence of Silent Hill both as a game and lore-wise. When navigating the menu, the horror of what you're about to play is not yet known. This captures Silent Hill so well. Your initial confusion quickly transforms into fear when the veil abruptly drops. At this point, Silent Hill was already established as a horror series, but Silent Hill 2 was taking it to the next level. Most of Silent Hill 2's sound design is pure perfection, from the obvious noises to the not so obvious noises to the masterfully crafted soundtrack. What really sells the horror is the ambience. Silent Hill 2 is made up of wide open spaces and very cramped spaces, and the sound design makes you feel uncomfortable no matter where you are. The sounds of Silent Hill are meant to get under your skin, and they do just that. The noises from monsters are chilling on their own, but partnered with the distorted radio screeches you use to determine if there are monsters nearby, makes the situation become almost overstimulating. Even the noises that are meant to help and reassure you feel just as threatening. Like the radio I just mentioned, saving your game is nearly seizure-inducing, with the loud drone and bright red light that engulfs your entire screen and bedroom. When people think of Silent Hill 2 and sound, they think of the soundtrack. You could use a bunch of cliched words and phrases to describe it. It's haunting, it's beautiful, it's creepy, it goes hard, etc. But there's so much variety that you can't really pigeonhole it. Much like the visuals, it emphasises James's descent into this mad world, into a town full of strange creatures and equally strange people, all for a shot at finding his apparently dead wife. Many of the game's iconic songs reflect Silent Hill 2's most thought-provoking story moments. In fact, most of these moments wouldn't be nearly as memorable without the music, because let's be real, they aren't carried by the voice acting.
How can you sit there and eat pizza?
The droning, often echoey melodies both complement and juxtapose what you are seeing on screen. They convey a sense of isolation that makes you feel like you're in an endless void, searching hopelessly for something you can't reach. And yet they also feel peaceful at times, almost implying that while James may believe he hasn't given up on Mary, he subconsciously already has. Not all songs are sad or scary though, some tracks absolutely slap. The Silent Hill 2 remake thankfully saw Akira make his return to the series. Not sure why I phrased it like that, bro never left the series. Akira decided instead of throwing away such a masterful soundtrack in favour of a completely new one, he was going to instead bring modern twists to a lot of them, while remaining true to their original sounds. It feels like new life has been breathed into them, with many tracks having brand new instruments and even vocal performances included in them, adding deeper layers of meaning. This was the right decision for Konami and Bloober Team to make. I'm all for new music in a game, but with a near perfect soundtrack like that of Silent Hill 2, it didn't need to be too complicated. It could have ended up hurting the themes portrayed in the original, which would have weakened the impact of the story for a lot of people, but these added layers to these already established songs feel like they not only capture the additional depth of the game, but also feel like they capture more about James as a person. James's story is one of the most iconic things to come out of Silent Hill as a series, right up there with Pyramid Head, Fog, and PT. It's a story that set it apart from other horror horror games at the time. Horror games almost always put horror above everything else. It didn't matter if the story was a bit silly, as long as players were scared, developers were happy. Silent Hill 2 felt like it wanted to not only make the player shit their pants, but also finish the game feeling satisfied with a great story, a story that makes you reflect, question, and sit in a depressive stoop for half an hour after playing. Silent Hill 2's story is regarded as one of the most gut-wrenching stories, with a twist that is incredibly hard to swallow. James is the focal point of the narrative. After all, this is his version of Silent Hill, and everything that resides in the town comes from his subconscious. Well, most things. Keep in mind, this is where I'll start to get into some heavy spoilers for Silent Hill 2, as I want to focus on James as a character and how the remake actually elevates him. James in the original, while iconic for some of his voice actors' line deliveries,
because of the way they looked at you,
feels a bit out of place in the game. Silent Hill 2 is very dark in all senses of the word. The subject matter it tackles is heavy, and it's really hard to see because it's really dark. Though the game's writing and performances are a little silly at times, the message and tone remain coherent throughout. With James, the issue comes from the fact that we spend the most time with him, since he's the playable character, and that means it's easier to catch the character's imperfections. His biggest issue is that he doesn't feel like someone who is remorseful or guilty. The way he acts and carries himself doesn't feel like someone who is mourning the death of his wife, or someone who is remotely concerned with the weird shit he is seeing in the town. Even when confronted with the truth about what happened between him and Mary, though the reveal itself is shocking to the player, it doesn't feel like James is really disturbed by the memory of killing her, but rather just gets bummed out for a minute. Oh, what? No way. Oh well. The remake version of James feels so much more real. He perfectly embodies the demeanour and personality of a man who has lost something important to him. The way he interacts with the other people in Silent Hill feels so natural. He's not trying to be quirky or provocative. He doesn't even really want to be talking to these people. His whole focus is put on finding Mary, which makes it all the more heartbreaking when he learns the truth. Even as someone who knew the ending before playing the game, James's performance in the remake makes his story all the more tragic, and it makes the impact of what he did all the more painful. This version of James is a lot easier to feel sympathy for. While his actions of course are not 100% justifiable, he genuinely seems remorseful and torn up about everything that happened with him and Mary, and his relationship with Maria also feels different in the remake. Maria remains nearly identical in both versions of Silent Hill 2. She is the embodiment of temptation for James and is ultimately the main villain of the story, the final piece he needs to let go of. In the original, James seems to like her company a lot more, entertaining the idea of scrapping his quest to find Mary to leave with Maria, using his knob to guide him on his quest instead of his heart. But James in the remake seems to keep her at arm's length. The clearest difference between the two can be seen in the cutscene. Original James embraces Maria, putting his arm around her to comfort her, but remake James doesn't do this. Though Maria still leans on him for a hug, he remains still and quickly changes the subject. The remake does a much better job at showing James's desperation to be reunited with Mary, whereas you could see the original James leaving with Maria as one of the possible endings. To me, this feels very out of place for the remake, and the only two endings that fit this version of James are the water and leave endings. I can only picture this James having the courage to leave or wanting to be reunited with Mary permanently. He'd never simp for that slag. The graphical leap of the remake also helps reinforce James's misery. Original James looks too clean for Silent Hill. Bright blonde hair, perfect skin, and a nice jacket with colourful badges on it makes it seem like James hasn't been struggling all that much. Remake James, on the other hand, has been through the ringer. Purple rings under his eyes, stubble growing, and a boring green jacket make him seem more dishevelled, implying that without Mary, he's not been getting any sleep or looking after himself. It makes his struggle to overcome the likes of Pyramid Head, the other monsters, and Maria feel all the more earned for his character. Again, the guy murdered his wife, but it's hard not to feel sorry for poor James.
Why are you still here? I told you to go. Are you deaf? Don't come back.
Mary sounds like a right bitch in this one. No wonder he killed her. That was a joke. Silent Hill 2 has aged incredibly well in terms of horror. The fact that a game over 20 years old at this point is still able to scare players has to be commended. Having said that, the actual gameplay of Silent Hill 2 hasn't held up quite as well. Combat is serviceable at best. The player doesn't have to put much thought into killing an enemy. If you're holding a melee weapon, just point and click several times until the enemy dies. And if you have a gun, just do the same, but a lot less. As long as you aren't standing directly next to an enemy, you usually win every single fight, and enemies don't move quick enough to mess up your flow. The remake completely reimagines the combat, which it needed considering the player's perspective has changed. This change meant the player needed more freedom when fighting. Locking onto an enemy and repeatedly hitting them just wouldn't cut it. It's not a combat system that's going to win awards or break down barriers, but it makes the player actually have to think and tackle enemies in different ways. In the original, James could just beat up an enemy and basically stun lock them until he died, but now enemies don't go down so easily. Enemies in the remake have unstoppable attacks that James can only dodge. which means you now have to time your attacks well and not go too in on enemies, as they can do serious damage if you don't read their movements. It takes a while to get used to, but eventually the combat becomes second nature, as enemies are a lot less unavoidable this time around. Free aiming also makes using firearms a lot more efficient, as you can now pick targets easier. The behaviours of certain enemies have also been overhauled. Leggy bastards now crawl along ceilings in certain areas and actually hide pretty well, unlike in the original where they just stand still in the open like they're hiding from a lion drone. Unfortunately, the bosses in the original aren't too great either. James cooked up a lot of creepy monsters in that broken mind of his, but luckily for him, most enemies don't take very long to defeat, and some you don't even need to attack, as they eventually just get bored of you.
Right, screw this. I'm off.
Bloober Team actually revamped a lot of these boss fights from the ground up. Some take place in different locations, like the initial fight with Pyramid Head. Some take on a whole different style of play, like the fight with Angela's father. And the final fight with Maria or Mary has multiple stages to it. Partnering this with the new combat system makes these fights so much more engaging and challenging. Silent Hill 2 isn't a very long game. For a first time playthrough, it won't take you more than 10 hours. And the funny thing is, that time would have been even shorter if the game was easier to navigate. Silent Hill 2 is incredibly tedious when you're trying to find where to go and what door to unlock. It's a problem that many early survival horror games suffer from, backtracking and trying to figure out what key goes where, what specific piece of paper you need to look at, and what order these stupid coins need to go in, can make the classic Silent Hill 2 more frustrating than scary. The map made it a little bit easier to find where to go, but on the other hand, the morphing camera made it very difficult to find where you were going. The remake managed to streamline the process of navigation, while at the same time making the game longer. Finding where you need to go is so much easier in this version of Silent Hill 2, which makes the game flow so much better. No longer are you stuck walking into the same room. James also writes codes down on his map and where certain puzzles are, meaning you no longer have to take photos of codes on your phone. With remakes, there's always the issue of boring the old fans. It's all well and good keeping things mostly the same, but if there's no change between the two, then what's the point? Puzzle concepts in the remake were expanded on. Most of the puzzles remain intact, but have been tweaked to have different answers or methods of beating them. Some new puzzles have also been added since the length of the game is longer. A game built on mystery needs some good brain teasers, and it was great to see so many of them get expanded upon in the remake. Silent Hill 2 will remain a horror great for years to come, thanks to its influence on the genre as a whole. And while it may seem like I don't rate the original highly, I just think the remake takes everything great about it and makes these concepts better. Well, almost everything. One issue I had with the remake is that it's really easy. I played the game on standard difficulty. It took me 16 hours to beat, and between all the enemies and bosses you fight in the game, I didn't die once. Now maybe that's just because I'm a video game god, but the real answer is that the game gives you too many safety nets. Save points feel more numerous than they were in the original, guns feel more effective, and there's health items practically everywhere. Luckily, the game is carried by the story, atmosphere, puzzles, and its compelling characters, though most of the supporting cast are greatly improved in the remake. There's one character that definitely feels worse. Some of you may think I'm talking about Eddie because of the lack of arse crack on display, but I was able to get over this flaw. No, I'm talking about Laura. This kid isn't my favourite character in either version of Silent Hill 2, but the original's version fits the context of that part of the story so much better. She talks and acts like a typical little girl, but in the remake she comes across so creepily, like she's an adult in a little girl's body. Everyone else was great, but Laura...
I knew it. You didn't care about her. I hate you, James! I hate you! I hate you! I hate you!
Please just leave me alone. But apart from these hiccups, I can't recommend this game enough. Please play this game. It'll change your life. It changed my life. Like I said in the beginning, I was Silent Hill's biggest hater, Resident Evil till I die, and after playing that remake, all I can say is, give us more remakes please, more games, more Silent Hill games, please Konami, please Bloober, I'm fucking begging you.